Hi and welcome back. My name is Susan Lohman, the Crochet Architect. I have another style of tapestry crochet to teach you today, and this one is in turned rows. So let's get started. So here I have two tapestry crochet pieces, and you can see that they're two different styles of tapestry crochet. This one is rows worked all on the right side, and you begin and end each row and turn those ends into fringe. And if you haven't learned this style of tapestry crochet, go ahead and check out my other video for tapestry crochet. I have a link for that in the video description so you can find that video. But I'm going to teach you this style today. This style does not require cutting off the ends at the end of each row. This style is a right side and a wrong side row, and you alternate back and forth just like you do in regular crochet. So let's get started with that. I'm going to be using some Omega Sinfonia today, and this is a cotton yarn and it's a sport weight. I'm also going to be using a size E or 3.5 millimeter hook. So the first thing we do is we're going to look at our chart, and this is a free chart on my website for this coaster. It's a lot like the other coaster chart, but there's a couple extra rows added, one on top and one on bottom. And I've got the row numbers right and left of the chart, so you can follow those row numbers. So go ahead and get a copy of this chart, which is a free download on my website, and the link is in the video description for that. And if we look at our chart closely, we can count that there are 17 squares across. We're going to have 17 stitches on our first row, which means we need to start with 18 chains. And I have 18 chains already worked here, and we can go ahead and start our first row. Now, with tapestry crochet, you always want to be carrying one yarn underneath. So even though there are no color changes in the first two rows, I want to carry the unused color underneath my stitches so that the thickness will be the same on every row. Because if I didn't, then I would have some thinner rows, which might change my gauge quite a bit. So we'll go ahead and start carrying our other color that we're going to change to. And I'm going to work a single crochet into the back bump of each chain, just to have a nice finished edge. Since I'm doing an edging around the whole thing, it doesn't really matter. So if you'd rather go into the back loop or two loops, that's fine too. But I'm just going to go ahead and do my single crochet into the back bump, if I can get my hook in there. I don't know if you ever have trouble getting your hook into stitches. There we go. And then I'm going to yarn over and do my single crochet. So here's my first stitch. And if you see here, this is very loose. So I'm going to go back and fix that, make it a little bit tighter. We always like to have the loop nice and tight on our hook. Not too tight, not too loose, so that we get a nice firm stitch, and that's a little bit better. So I'm working over this thread, or the other strand of yarn. You can see that it's in between there. And I'm going to do a single crochet in the back bump of each chain across, always working around this carried yarn. That's what makes this tapestry crochet and not another style of crochet such as intarsia. You're always working over one or more strands of yarn that you're not using for your stitches. So we do that in each back bump of each chain across. And I will meet you when I get to the end. This row is just the blue color, so I'm not going to be changing colors. Okay, I finished row 1 and I should have 17 single crochet across here. Let's make sure before we go on. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and this is my first one, which is 17. Now my first single crochet was in the second chain from the hook, and that's exactly how we do single crochet rows. The only difference on this is we're carrying the unused color underneath the stitches that we've worked. You can see the carried yarn is coming out the left and the right. Now every time you finish a row or change colors, you want to make sure that your carried yarn is not too tight or too loose in here. Sometimes the carried yarn can be poking out and that won't look good in your finished project, so you just want to give the carried yarn a little tug, and that's good on here. So we're ready to start row 2, and we can chain 1 and turn. Now you can turn clockwise or counterclockwise. It doesn't matter on this technique. What matters is that your carried yarn stays mostly to the wrong side. You don't want it peeking out on the right side of your piece. So our carried yarn is to the wrong side, and we're going to work over our carried yarn again in row 2, as we just have all blue stitches in this row. So we're going to work under both loops of our stitches in this technique of tapestry crochet. So we're working over our carried yarn and into both loops of our single crochets, and we're going to single crochet all the way across our row until we get to the end. So I'll meet you at the end. Okay, here I am at the end of row 2, but as you can see, I have one more stitch here to work. So I want to make sure that I don't skip any stitches and work into each one, including the beginning and the end of the row. Okay, now I've done something on purpose here to show you how important this is. Remember, I told you to make sure that your carried yarn was not sticking out, and it can stick out quite a bit sometimes, and we don't want that because really this is the right side of our work. Row 1 is the right side on this project, and we were just working a wrong side row, and if that carried yarn is sticking out, it's going to be very unsightly on the front of our work. So we're going to give that a little tug and make sure that that gets buried in there. We also want to make sure that this isn't too long of a loop when we're turning our rows at the beginning, and that looks good to me. So we're ready with that adjusted, our carried yarn adjusted. We're ready to start row 3. Oops, I always like to put my hook back in with the adjustable side of the loop on the front of the hook. So we will chain 1 and turn. Now we're turning to the right side. So we want to make sure that our carried yarn is more to the back instead of the front. So that'll be the wrong side. And we need to find out from our chart first, before we do this row, what stitches we have. So here was our first rows, 1 and 2. Here's our row 3, and we're going to have 5 blue stitches, 1 white, another 5 blue, another white, and another 5 blue across this row. And we're always starting at the edge of the row with the row number and going right or left according to the chart. So let's do that. Let's make sure before we do that though, this is looking like it's a little bit bunched up here on row 2. So let's just kind of stretch that out a little bit to make sure that our carried yarn has not gotten too tight in there. After practicing this a while, you'll get the hang of how much is too much and how much is not enough on that carried yarn for adjusting it. So we're ready to start we've got our carried yarn here, and we want to make sure we're going in that first stitch and around our carried yarn each time we make our stitch. So here's our first. We have 5 single crochets to do here at the beginning. So that's 2, 3, 4, and now our 5th single crochet is where we're going to change color. And if you can see right here, this is rather loose. So we want to adjust our carried yarn before we change our color. So let's just pull that a little bit, and you can see how that tightens up on the back. And then we don't have that loop sticking out there. So then we're ready to change colors for our 1 white single crochet. Always in the last yarn over of the stitch is where you change your color for the next stitch of the opposite color. Now our white color is what we're using, and the blue color becomes our carried yarn. So we're going to insert our hook into both loops of that stitch and under that carried yarn and pull up a loop. And if we were doing more than one stitch, we would finish our stitch with the white, but we're changing back to blue. So now we're going to yarn over and finish that white single crochet with the blue, which becomes the top of the next stitch. So now we're going to carry the white and work with the blue for 5 stitches across here, always carrying that yarn and working over that carried yarn to encase the yarn. And then it becomes available when we need to change colors again. And we have 4 single crochets. Now on our 5th single crochet, we're going to change colors. So let's check before we do that. We've got 5 stitches here. We want to make sure that our carried yarn is not sticking out, not too tight or too loose. So now we can change color to the white after our 5 blues. In that 5th blue one, we're going to change color to white and do 1 white single crochet. But we don't finish it with white because we're going to change back to blue. So here's our 1 blue. I always like to also, when I'm changing colors, I like to adjust this leading leg here to make sure that it's not too tall like that. I want it about the same height of the other stitches. So there's another little hint for you for making your stitches the same size. So we will finish off this row with 5 blue single crochets. And then if we want, we can count the stitches to make sure there's 17 still. I won't do that, but I had 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, so that totals 17. So that's exactly what we have on the chart, and we're ready to do row 4. We want to make sure that that's not too tight or too loose on our carried yarn. So we'll go ahead and chain 1 and turn. Now, what's going to happen with you changing back and forth with the different colors is your yarns can get tangled. And I'm just doing a little bit of demonstration with this blue here. So I'm just going to pull it through so that it's not tangled up with the white. But they will start kind of tangling up on each other. They'll get wrapped around like this, so you have to unwrap them. Okay, so I've got the chain 1 here, and I'm ready to start row 4. I even got the knot out of the yarn that you saw me working with there. And we're ready to move on to row 4. So let's see, before we do that, what stitches we've got in row 4. Let's move our magnet up. We can put our magnet below or above the row that we're working on. I like to put it above because then I can see what the stitches are below to see how they line up. So in row 4, we're starting from this side. We have 5 blue again, then we have 2 white, 3 blue, 2 white, and 5 blue. So let's work that across this row. We're going to turn our work, and this is going to be a wrong side row. So we want to make sure that that carried yarn is towards the wrong side, not the right side. So we can start working our blue stitches over our carried white yarn under both loops of each stitch. And here's our first single crochet, and we need a total of 5 at the beginning. Whoops, we want to make sure we get under both loops. If we make little mistakes like that, our piece will not look as nice. So here's our 5th single crochet, and we want to make sure that that carried yarn isn't too tight or too loose. So we give it a gentle tug, and then we can drop our blue and pick up our white and yarn over and pull through. Now see how tall this leg is of that stitch? We want to adjust that and make it just the same height as the other stitches before we go on. And we want to adjust our white loop on the hook so it's not too big at the top of our next stitch. And now we're going to do 2 white single crochets working around the blue carried yarn, inserting our hook under both loops, front and back. So here's our first stitch and our second stitch. Another thing to make sure of, see, this is our carried yarn. We don't want to insert our hook under that carried yarn of the row below. We only want to insert it under the front and back loops of our stitch and carry the current yarn on this row. There, we don't want to put our hook in the wrong place. So here's the beginning of our second stitch, and we're going to change back to the blue so that we do 3 blue stitches in the middle. And I can hold this on the front if I want to. That helps me make sure that I actually work the stitch around the carried yarn, because if the carried yarn is on the back, sometimes it's hiding there and doesn't get worked over or around. Here's my 3rd blue stitch. We want to make sure that's not too tight or too loose. Finish our stitch with the white and adjust that bottom leg of the blue stitch, and then we can do 2 white stitches over the blue carried yarn, and then we're going to change back to the blue. Finish that second white stitch with the blue, which becomes the top of our next blue stitch. Make sure we're going under the front and back loops of our stitch and around that carried yarn. So here's 1, 2, 3, whoops, make sure it's under both loops, 3, 4, and 5 blue stitches. So this is the end of row 4. We can adjust this carried yarn a little bit, but as you can see, it only gets adjusted to that white stitch. In these first 2 rows, it went all the way across because we never changed colors. But in this row, it only gets adjusted to that last white stitch. That's the end of row 4. And I'm not going to demonstrate all the rows in this, but if you go to my website and get the free chart, you can go ahead and make the whole coaster. I will, however, demonstrate the edging that goes around the coaster. Okay, here's the edging that I've done on this coaster, and you can see that there are 2 rounds. There's a white round and a blue round. So let me demonstrate how to do that. I have another one here that I'm at the last stitch of the last row, and I'm going to work that last stitch, but I'm going to change to the white in that last stitch because I don't need to fasten these off and join again. I can just switch out my colors. So we're going to be working with our white to do the first round of edging, and we'll go ahead and chain 1. And I'm going to just hold this blue going backwards towards this corner. This is going to be the first corner, and I'm going to go ahead and just work over that blue into the edge of this first row. Okay, so we'll go ahead and insert our hook in there and do our first single crochet, and that keeps that blue into the corner where we're going to need it when we get around to that stitch. Now I'm noticing that this stitch is too loose, so let me do that again and keep it nice and tight on my hook, working around that. So you get to see me do it twice. Okay, so we're not going to be carrying this blue around for our edging because we don't need to do that. But we do need to do a single crochet in the edge of each row. So there's this space, and really there's already a hole there, if you want to call them holes, a natural spot where the hook wants to go in the edge of each row. And we do that across the side to the bottom. I'll do that really quick and I'll meet you at this bottom corner. Okay, I've gotten to the end of this side, to the bottom corner, and I should have 17 single crochets since I have 17 rows. There's one in the edge of each row across here. And what I'm going to do at the bottom is chain one for that corner, and then I'm going to single crochet in the bottom of each chain going across. So whichever way you worked into your chains, you will have one or two free loops at the bottom of each chain for the foundation row at the beginning of row one. So we're going to single crochet across to the next corner where we will chain one and single crochet across in the edge of each row across to this corner, chain one and single crochet in each stitch across the top edge. And I'll meet you when I get to that corner. Okay, I've gotten around the coaster with round one of the edging in white. I have 17 single crochet on each of the 4 edges and a chain one in the first 3 corners, and I'm ready to chain one in the last corner. But I want to go ahead and switch to the blue to do my chain one. So I'm going to chain one, and then I'm going to start round 2. I'm going to start with a slip stitch in the back loop of the first stitch and then chain one. And I can go ahead, actually before I do that, I would like to tighten up that slip stitch a little bit. And then I'll go ahead and chain one. Okay, now we're going to single crochet in the back loop of each stitch across each side for our round 2. I'll get to this first corner and I'll meet you there and show you what we do in the corners. Okay, I've finished this side. I've got a single crochet in each of these 17 single crochet, and now I'm at my chain one in the corner. So because we're working in this back loop of our stitches, we want to also work in the back loop of our chain. So in this corner, we're going to increase a little bit. So we're going to do a single crochet and a chain and another single crochet. If we don't increase in the corner, then the corner will not lay flat. So now we'll do the same thing across this bottom edge. We're going to single crochet in the back loop of each single crochet across, and we'll do the same thing in this corner with a single crochet, chain one, single crochet in the back loop of that chain. We'll work across this row, this edge the same way, do this corner the same way, and work across the top edge. And I'll meet you when I get to the beginning corner to show you how to finish it off. Okay, I've gotten around all 4 edges. I did my increases in the corners, and I have my last corner here to do my increase. You can see that this is my last single crochet that I worked into, and this is my chain one in the corner. So I want to do a single crochet, chain 1, and a single crochet in this last corner. Now I'm going to do something called an invisible join. So I'm going to make my loop a little longer and pull this loop through. And this is instead of joining with the slip stitch, which you would see very easily right there, I'm going to do this invisible join. And I have my strand of yarn on my tapestry needle, and I'm going to insert my needle from back to front. You can do this a bunch of different ways. This is the way I've been doing it lately. In the top strands of that first single crochet, that's where I inserted my needle. And now I'm going to insert it back down in the top of this last single crochet that I worked, and I also want to go under the back strand on the back of that single crochet. And here is an invisible join. So you don't have that ugly slip stitch at the edge there, and then the end can just be woven in across here with the blue. You can trim off the white and weave your white in the other side, and then weave these ends in at the bottom, and you'll have a finished tapestry crochet snowflake coaster in whatever colors you choose. The gauge isn't all that important in this pattern. Just want to have somewhat tight stitches with the yarn and hook size that you're using. I hope you've enjoyed learning this style of tapestry crochet and you'll give this coaster a try. Don't forget to download the free pattern from my website. You can find that link in the video description below, along with some more information about this project. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to see more crochet videos. And if you like bloopers, stay tuned to the end of the video. Thanks so much for watching, and happy tapestry crocheting to all of you. In my previous tapestry crochet video, I taught you how to do all right side rows in the tapestry crochet technique, cutting the tails at the yarn at the end of each row to make tails to turn into French. But in this one, turning your work, you'll have a right side and a wrong side. What I want to do is do my, you know what? Okay, stop. Go ahead. And then I'm going to start my slip stitch round. Not my slip stitch round. And then I'm going to start my...
Start over.
Okay.